So the areas we were really looking for, we're dealing with kind of a highland reservoir, but it's also got a lot of grass on that lake, and it's got willow grass, and a lot of this has died off. Okay, so there's not really any green grass growing anywhere, but a lot of these large heads were pushed like right on the edge of that grass off these like secondary points. And when I say secondary point, I don't mean a physical secondary point like where you've got the bank coming out and you can physically see that secondary point. But what I'm talking about is those areas where it's flat and you got a grass line that goes flat, and then it's got a little indentation on the outside, and then a little indentation on the outside. Those large heads were typically sitting on the edge of those secondary grass points, okay? Once again, grass points, not land points. Now, my partner, he was using a custom hand-built buzzbait that day that was very similar to the weed whacker. It was just larger. It was more like your typical war eagle size buzzbait, but he was throwing the spunk shad on it, which is he was throwing a swim bait on it at the time and was not getting the bite, so I told him to put a spunk shad on it. He put the spunk shad on it, natural electric shad color, and then that's when the bites started firing off for him. So we're catching multiple fish back to back in those typical areas. I noticed when we got to the lake that the water temperature had actually a couple weeks before, the main lake was like 71 degrees, and you'd push up in the backs of these creeks and stuff, and the water temperature was like 63, 64. So quite a bit of difference, almost a 10-degree difference. One of the main things that I noticed was when we first got there was the water temperature on the main lake was at 63, 64 degrees. So we make a run all the way to the backs of the creek to check and see what the water temperature was like in the back of the creeks. Has it went down? Has it went up? So on and so forth. Where's that thermocline? And it was the exact same as the main lake. So that tells me a lot of these fish that may have been in areas that I was focusing on before could migrate. Now, the fish that's in the very backs of the creeks are typically going to stay there. That's where they're going to be. They're just kind of going to move to the nearest deepest water that they can find in that creek, and that could be 100 yards or that could be a couple miles. It just kind of depends. But that tells me that these fish are more than likely going to be spread out as they was. They were not going to be schooled up, and that if we were going to target a winning bag of fish, we were going to have to find those largemouth that were spread out in certain isolated areas. And that's exactly what we did.